Hello, how are you doing? I'm here with the second big book prize announcement of the week because this is for the International Booker Prize, which is distinct from the normal Booker Prize because this awards the best single book translated into English and published in the UK or Ireland in the past year. And out of 135 entries, the judges chose these 13 books for this year's Longlist. So as I enjoy doing, I'm going to go through and discuss summaries of each of these books and if I have any thoughts or feelings about them. First, I have to point out the noticeable and massive difference in page numbers between some of these nominations. You have these books and you have these books. And so between Paradais, which is under 120 pages, then you have The Books of Jacob, which is almost 900 pages long, so quite a difference. Also, a few notable things about this group of books. These novels were translated from 10 different languages and originated in 12 different countries. There's also a good representation of Asian stories this year, which definitely hasn't been the case in past years, so that's really wonderful to see. There are also quite a few queer stories or stories that involve queer characters. Two previous winners of this prize have new books which are represented on this list. Fun fact, The Vegetarian by Han Kan, which won the very first International Booker Prize, was translated by Deborah Smith, who was the founder of Tilted Access Press, and Tilted Access Press has 3 books nominated for this year's prize, and they've never had a book in the running before. Anton translated 2 books which are up for this year's award, so he's a bit of a superstar. I first heard about this translator a few years ago when an interview with him was posted on Matthew's channel, so I'll put a link to that below. The prize for winning this award is £50,000, which is split between the author and translator, which is a lovely thing, and also each of the shortlisted authors and translators received £2,500, so it's quite a lucrative award. And from what I understand, translators don't make, or authors even, don't often make a huge amount of money, so this prize can make a really big difference in the lives of some authors and translators, so it's just a really wonderful thing. So out of these 13 books, I have read 4 of them, and some of them I really loved, and so I'm so happy to see them on this list. A number of the books I've heard of, but I've just not got around to reading yet, so this is a great prompt, to finally get to them. And then a few of them I've not even really heard of before, so it's quite an exciting group. So, okay, I'm going to go through each of the books now. First off is Cursed Bunny by Bora, and it is translated from the Korean by Anton, and this is a collection of short stories, so obviously it involves a whole range of characters and situations, but it uses a unique blend of magical realism, horror, and science fiction to comment on modern issues to do with the patriarchy and capitalism. And there are stories that involve androids and mysterious creatures, so it sounds so good. And actually Bora is a translator herself. Also, I just love this cover, don't you? After the Sun by Jonas Eika, and this is translated from the Danish by Sherilyn, Nicolette, Hellberg, and this is another collection of short stories, of 5 short stories, or maybe they're 4. I've heard it described how 2 of the stories are so connected to each other. They're really 2 pieces of a whole, and they use an unconventional narrative style to dramatize issues to do with capitalism, technology, sexuality, and drugs. And this book is also listed for this year's Republic of Consciousness Prize, which I made another video about. And I think out of all of the books on this list, this one has the most mixed reviews from people, and I actually started it myself towards the end of last year, and I put it down quite quickly because I felt completely disorientated and just wasn't able to concentrate on it at the time. And so I wanted to return to it. But, these are stories which are really odd and are quite experimental. So, yeah, require lots of concentration. A new name, Septology 6 through 7 by Jon Fosse, and it's translated from the Norwegian by Damion Searls. And this is about a character named Asla, who is an artist and lives in quite like a remote location. And there's also another character of the same name that lives nearby and is also an artist and is this character's doppelganger. And it looks at their stories. This takes place in this section of the story takes place just before Christmas, and it examines a lot of their memories to do with the former wives of these characters, and also a neighbor that lives nearby them, which has the name Ashlik, which I have to be careful how I pronounce that name. So as you can see, this is sections 6 through 7, and so actually this is the third book in a trilogy which has been being published by Fitzcarraldo Editions in the past few years. I've only read the first book in the trilogy, and I've heard by reading accounts from other people that you really need to have read the first two books to understand the story in its complete form. And I mean, I'm sure you could still get a lot by reading just the third part, but I think probably the first two parts really are necessary because it refers back to certain events and things that you might not understand otherwise. It gives a certain different perspective on certain events that appeared in previous sections of the story. So yeah, this is gonna be another quite big commitment, because between these three books there's a combined page total of 861 pages, and I think I do really want to read the second part of this series before getting to the third part. But I did really enjoy the first part. I thought it was so fascinating, and unlike anything else I'm reading today, I mean, he's kind of likened to or he's described as Norwegian Samuel Beckett, which if you know Samuel Beckett's writing, you'll understand that kind of philosophical sense in this strange, setting, and I think that really accurately describes it. And I love Samuel Beckett's work, and I think his writing is so fascinating, and so it's probably worth the time commitment. More Than I Love My Life by David Grossman, and it is translated from the Hebrew by Jessica Cohen. And this novel, in the beginning, it's set on a kibbutz in Israel, and the narrator is describing the experiences of her family before she was born, of her parents and her grandparents, and the unusual way that they got together and how they came to these relationships with a lot of baggage. And it's quite telling that the narrator doesn't even introduce herself and say her name, which is Gili, until quite far into the novel. But when it gets to that point, then she has a number of experiences with her family, with her father and her mother and her grandmother, where they decide to make a documentary about her grandmother's life and go on a journey to record this. And in doing so, they unearth all of this family history and secrets and issues that haven't been being dealt with for many years. Julie has quite an antagonistic relationship with her mother, but also her grandmother has been harboring this horrible burden for a long time of a very difficult decision she had to make at one point in her life, which is sort of reflected in the title of this book. And the way it goes into this family history is so meaningful and kind of engages with larger issues to do with the horrors of World War II and the terror of living under the Yugoslav President Tito. And this novel is based on a real life individual named Eva Panik Nahir, who a documentary was made about her life, and she became friends with David Grossman and asked him if he could write a novel about her family and her story, which is what he did. And he uses quite a unique form to do this, and also does and he got her permission to fictionalize, some aspects of her life for, the sake of the drama in this story. And I just think it is such a beautiful and powerful tale, looking at issues to do with memory and history and family, that I just found it completely engrossing. The Book of Mother by Violaine Huisman, and it's translated from the French by Leslie Camhi. And this is a debut novel. It's a coming-of-age story which describes a woman's relationship with her mother, who is a very passionate but quite a volatile individual that struggles with mental health issues while she's trying to be the perfect wife and mother. And it is told in 3 sections, charting the experiences and lives of the mother and her 2 daughters. And it sounds like quite a moving and emotional story. Heaven by Mieko Kawakami, and this is translated from the Japanese by Samuel Bett and David Boyd. And this novel is so beautiful and heartbreaking. I was really struck emotionally by it because it's about a 14-year-old boy who is relentlessly bullied because he has a lazy eye, and another girl in his class who he becomes kind of friends with because she is also really horribly bullied. And you know how people say that our differences are what make us unique, and the difficulties we go through make us stronger as individuals, but what does this really mean, and about our psychological makeup? And the author explores in such a moving way how this affects us and what these power relationships that exist during adolescence really mean, and where they come from. And so as the bullying of these 2 adolescents intensifies, they have very different reactions to it, and she follows the story of that. So there's quite a lot of surprises in it, and I just think it is such a strong and powerful book. And so it's really made me think, and it's really fascinating that there were 2 translators of this book, and I think one of the translators handles more of the dialogue, and another of the translators handles more of the narration, the general narration, but actually it's more of a combination of, in a collaborative effort between them. And I found a really interesting interview between them because they've translated a few books by Mieko Kawakami. So I'll put a link to that below as well, because it's a really interesting discussion that raises a lot of issues to do with translation. And I know a lot of people thought her novel Breasts and Eggs was going to be longlisted last year, and that didn't make the cut. I also read that and thought that was a very powerful novel, but quite a different book from this. But this book is excellent. Paradais by Fernanda Melchor, and it's translated from the Spanish by Sophie Hughes. And like I said, this is a very short novel. It's about 2 wayward teenagers that break into a luxury housing complex, and they devise a very sinister and mindless and brutal scheme because they're frustrated. They aren't really able to get the things that they want in their lives. And I've not read it yet. I think this is also the only book on the list which hasn't been published here in the UK yet. I think it's due to be published on March 23rd, though I think it's already been published in America. And I've not read it yet, but I have read the author's novel Hurricane Season, and I've heard that this novel is in kind of quite a similar vein in that it explores a lot of issues to do with masculinity and violence, and also she just has such a hypnotic way of writing about action that you're just completely mesmerized by the narrative. And I was really hoping that this novel would win in the year that it was nominated. So I'm really looking forward to reading this. Love in the Big City by Sae-Yun Park, and it's translated from the Korean by Anton. And this is the story of a young man in South Korea named Yun who is having difficulty settling down into a stable job and a stable relationship. He spends a lot of time out drinking and hooking up with with men that he meets on dating apps, and having a lot of unhealthy relationships. And it describes his experiences in relationships with a friend of his and with his mother, and two different men that he has a relationship with. And what I think is so unique about this book is there have been a lot of novels recently that can be characterized as kind of disaster woman novels. You know, as I was talking about with my friend Anna recently when talking about the Women's Prize, there have been a lot of novels that seem to, you know, describe this kind of experience. But this is that sort of experience described from a man's perspective who is making a lot of bad choices and realizes that he's making bad choices, but he, you know, can't help his nature, and that he has this drive to do these things. And so through a lot of this novel, I felt like quite frustrated with him, you know, and like, make good choices for yourself. But obviously, you know, he can't do that. And I think it describes like modern gay experience in a way, in a very like striking and honest way that I've not read about in much fiction before. I made a whole video talking about how much I love this novel and how much I connected to it, you know, despite feeling these like frustrations with the main character. And another thing that I think is really great about it is that it describes men's bodies in a way that is not idealized, and that's something that, you know, doesn't happen in much gay fiction. Like a lot of the time you get these descriptions of, you know, like chiseled abs and things, but, you know, these men, you know, they have real body shapes, and the way that he represents that I think is really important. So yeah, this is a stunning novel. Happy Stories, mostly by Norman Erickson Pasarabu, and this is translated from the Indonesian by Tiffany Zhao. And as you can imagine, this is a collection of short stories, of 12 short stories, which are lightly connected with each other. Some of the stories are very short, only a page long, and others are a bit longer, like up to 30 pages. And they're short stories that draw upon a lot of like religious and like folklore stories, but they put queer characters at the center of these stories. And I think that's so original and exciting and necessary. And I've been meaning to read this author and their work for quite a while now, because the Tilted Access Press also published this poetry collection by him called Sergius Seeks Bacchus, and this book has been sitting on my like to be read soon shelf for a really long time, as some books, you know, tend to do, and I don't know why I haven't got around to reading him yet. I've also had this book for quite a while, but, you know, there's lots of books to get to. Also, something that's really lovely is that in this edition, at the very end of the book, there's a discussion between the author and translator, and so I think that's just a fun, like, added bonus feature of this book. Elena Knows by Claudia Pinheiro, and is translated from the Spanish by Francis Riddle. And I'm so happy and excited to see this book on this list. I think this book is just incredible. It follows the story of a woman named Elena that is living with Parkinson's in quite like a late stage, where she finds it very debilitating to do much of anything without taking her pills on a very rigorous schedule. But also it's a story about how her daughter died, and she thinks that she died through like foul play, like the police have ruled it a suicide, but she doesn't believe that. And so she embarks on an investigation to discover what actually happened. But obviously, because of her condition, this is incredibly difficult for her to do. And so you follow her journey, which is really quite a short journey, train journey to go visit an individual who she thinks can help. But every stage of it is a challenge, and the way she describes living with this disease and this condition is so powerful and unlike anything I've read before. It just completely draws you into that experience and makes you realize how difficult life is for her. But also, she is not the nicest person in the world. She's quite like vicious and biting in her opinions of other people. So that adds a slightly like comic element to this otherwise like quite serious story. And I think it's just how the author gets that balance is so well done. And so I think it's just amazing what this story does. Interestingly, in Argentina, Claudia Pinheiro is a best-selling author of mystery novels, and so it's kind of interesting that there's like a mystery element at the center of this book, but really it's dealing with a lot more like serious issues, you know, to do with health, obviously, but also to do with abortion. That becomes a strong element of the story. And Claudia Pinheiro, she's been an activist who has fought for the legalization of abortion in Argentina. So there's a whole political element to do. But yeah, this book is so strong. Phenotypes by Paulo Scott, and it's translated from the Portuguese by Daniel Hahn. This is a story of two mixed-race brothers in Brazil. One has lighter skin and is able to pass as white, and the other has darker skin, but how this means they have very different experiences and very different expectations placed upon them. So it is about race, racism, colorism, but also about social iniquity and classism and politics and a whole range of issues. Tomb of Sand by Gitanjali Shri, and this is translated from the Hindi by Daisy Rockwell. And this is the first time that a book translated from the Hindi has been included on an International Booker Prize list. So this is the story of an 80-year-old woman whose husband dies, and she experiences a deep grief because of this. But once she emerges from that grief, she decides she wants to fly in the face of convention, and she does this in a number of different ways. She befriends a hijra or a trans person, and she also journeys back to Pakistan with her daughter to reckon with their personal history, but also the history of partition. And this comes as quite like a surprise to her daughter, who thinks that she is the more liberal one. So it sounds like quite like an endearing story and a really fascinating one. But yes, it is a very long novel. So yeah, this will take some time to get to. And finally, I'm gonna break my arm. The Books of Jacob by Olga Tokarczuk, translated from the Polish by Jennifer Croft. And this is the fictionalized account of a real-life historical figure named Jacob Frank, who was alive during the 1700s. He was Jewish, but he converted to be a Muslim. He also converted to Catholicism. He attracted a wide range of followers or disciples. Some labeled him as a messiah, others labeled him as a scoundrel, and it charts the story of his life as well as large political and social changes occurring in Central Europe through the 1700s. And so yeah, it does so in exhaustive detail. It's quite unique in that it starts at the end, at the very beginning. You get the last page of the book, so you can see it starts in the late 800 pages, and then it goes backwards. So yeah, it seems to have quite a unique structure. I've heard also lots of competing opinions about this book. I know some people have been bunkered down with this over the winter period and have been slowly reading it. I have not read it yet, but I have also had very mixed feelings about Tokarczuk's work. So like her novel Flights, which previously won the International Booker Prize, I didn't really get on with this, and so I sort of gave up on it. And but Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead, which was nominated for the International Booker Prize but didn't win, I really enjoyed that and found it such an engaging story. So I've been meaning to go back to Flights, but yeah, now of course have the Books of Jacob as well. So it's going to be difficult to find time to get to this, and I do want to read it, but I don't know if I'll be able to read it before the shortlist is announced, which is on April 7th. So you have up until then if you want to read all of the books before the shortlist is announced. But yeah, that's not too long away, so that's quite a big ask. So I'd love to know in the comments what you think about this year's long list. Have you read any of these books? What do you think of them? Are you interested in reading any of these books now? I mean, I would definitely recommend Love in the Big City and Elena Knows and Heaven and More Than I Love My Life. I got much more emotional talking about Heaven and recollecting the experience of reading it than I expected to. But yeah, that's how fiction can affect us sometimes. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to reading some more of these books. But yeah, it's a question of finding the time. But yeah, there's some that I definitely want to get to. I think probably first I might read Paradais, like not just because it's the shortest one, but it's one that I'm just really keen to get to. Like I said, I really loved that author's previous book that I read. But yeah, so many good books, so little time, and yeah, I'd love to know your thoughts and feelings in the comments below. But I hope you're reading good things, and I will speak to you again soon. Bye-bye.